What we have is some examples of Oregon Sunstone. This comes from the Dust Devil Sunstone mine just outside of Plush, Oregon. Sunstone is a feldspar. It has a hardness of about 6.5 and varies a little bit from piece to piece. Some crystals seem to be a little bit more intact than others. And what we've got is actually several different colors. Some of these show a little bit of red and green. This big piece has kind of a light champagne color, but has some really nice schiller that you can see reflecting within the gemstone. Schiller is little tiny droplets of copper, and the presence of copper as the sunstone is in formation. And when you get large enough droplets of copper and the parts per million is high enough, they actually will align themselves with the cleavage plane of the stone, and tilting it just the right way, you'll get a nice reflection of light off of the schiller. And most of the really nice sunstone comes from the Dust Devil Sunstone mine. Some of the biggest pieces, in fact the three largest carvings in existence, is material that has actually come from the Sunstone, the Dust Devil Sunstone mine. So the Dust Devil is notorious for producing really nice material. This particular piece has a lot of bright schiller through the middle of the stone. It's a nice red piece. It's a very red. It's not the reddish brown in any way. The schiller that's in this piece is reflecting a little bit more of a goldish cast, which in recent analysis people have discovered that it actually has a little bit of gold content to it. So this piece might very well have some gold, traces of gold within the schiller itself. So it'd be an absolutely stunning gemstone. What we're going to do first is take a look at these pieces of sunstone and try to evaluate them. We're going to look for things like the cleavage plane of the sunstone, which could be important in how we cut it. We're going to look for internal inclusions within the sunstone and try to avoid those in whatever we decide to do with it. In a larger piece like this, which is 276 carats, we're going to look to see the fractures that it does have, how best we can dance around those and come up with the best single piece, maybe even take a piece off of this one to use as a faceted stone. These smaller pieces we'll be looking to try to see inside the stone a little bit better. And this piece in particular, we're going to attempt to do a carving. It's got a little fracture that you can see from the outside, but we're going to be looking as close as we can internally. And to do that, I use wintergreen oil, or people can use baby oil if you want. You don't have to have the real complicated, dangerous chemicals like refractol for sunstone. Refractive index of wintergreen oil, which you can usually get at the drugstore, is close enough that it makes the stone almost transparent. Baby oil as well. We just immerse the stone, bring it as close to the side as we possibly can. And most of the fractures and problems around the outside of the stone then become transparent, and you can look inside the stone a little bit better. This stone looks like we can probably take off a little bit of the fractured area on the outside and have pretty much most of the meat of the stone intact for the carving. And it's a very nice red. You can also get a little bit better look at the schiller within the stones, because you'll want to see how light reflects off of those. That's important in how you orient the stone for cutting. On the outside of the stone may be that rough, crusty material just from the matrix. This is a piece of rough sunstone that shows a seam of the crystallization through the middle here, and you can see it's just solid volcanic rock. Sometimes you'll have to grind that off before you actually immerse it to look into the stones. These stones happen to be fairly clean internally. You take this stone for example. It has a lot of nice bright schiller. Initially we can identify a cleavage plane because it's already began to cleave. And you want to make sure if we're going to use this for a cab that you orient that parallel to the top of the stone. The axis that you're looking for is perpendicular to that cleavage plane. You'll get the very best effect doing it that way. This stone looks like it has quite a few internal inclusions, so it's really important to immerse them ahead of time, or you'll end up being halfway in the middle of a project only to discover that the stone really isn't a good candidate for cutting into a cab. And the way this piece is looking, it's got quite a few internal fractures, and unfortunately they bisect right through the middle of the stone. So I don't know that it would be a candidate for trying to keep it as an intact piece. At best, you could probably saw it in half and get a small cab out of one section of it, or it's got nice bright schiller. You can just choose to keep it as a mineral specimen. You want to make sure you have an absorbent paper towel nearby just to clean off some of the excess. The good thing about wintergreen oil is it doesn't bother your skin. You can actually rub it on as a liniment. This piece is a little bit thin, but it also helps give you a lot of good transparency. You can look within the stone real well. This one doesn't seem to have any fractures that bisect the middle of the stone, but it's a relatively thin stone. So you're trying to find a blocky piece of material usually for faceted stones. This stone is probably a little bit more of a candidate for carving if you wanted to keep it intact, or you can actually separate a section out of the middle of it and come up with a fairly large size faceted stone. And that might actually be the direction that we go with this one, because it's a very clean stone. It doesn't have a lot of schiller. Schiller does affect the brilliance of a gemstone. What you are looking for there is if you have schiller that's perpendicular to the table of the stone, you're going to get reflections off of the schiller. If you orient the schiller perpendicular to the table of the stone, you can, in a sense, sometimes cut out the schiller where you don't see the schiller. However, the schiller does act much like the filter on the end of a camera lens, and it does block and filter out some of the light. So those stones have a tendency to be just a little bit duller than stones that don't have schiller. So this stone is a very good candidate. And I think probably what we would do here is cut the clear section off and isolate as much as we can this red area here and try to get as large a faceted gemstone as we possibly can out of that one. This 276 carat stone has a lot of potential to keep as an intact stone. You can obviously see all the way through the stone, and it does have a nice bright schiller through the middle of it. It doesn't have a whole lot of color to the material itself, but it has a beautiful schiller, a reflective schiller. So we've already got one side somewhat polished off and pre-sanded just so we can get a little bit better look into that end of it. And you don't always have to immerse the stone. Sometimes a bigger stone like this, if it doesn't fit in your little jar, you can just rub a little bit of the oil around the outside of the stone and you can get a little bit better look. There's a real nice bar of schiller through the middle of it that's showing up in this top camera. So we can identify that as the cleavage plane of the stone, because the cleavage plane will be parallel to the schiller. And rubbing it around the outside, we've got what looks like one large fracture that goes through this section. And so it looks like from this point outward we'll have to slice that piece of the stone off. And it's still a good candidate. It's a nice clean piece. It's still a good candidate for doing some kind of faceted gemstone, or actually an additional gemstone carving that perhaps will accent what we do with this larger piece. So having looked at this piece a little bit better, some of the first things that I can see we need to take off. The outside layer here is approximately 1/8 of an inch thick. It's got a lot of inclusions in it, but just beneath that is nice clean material. So the first thing we'll do is we'll rough out the piece of rock and take off some of the excess stuff that looks a little bit bad. We'll round off some of these corners that we're not going to want in the gemstone to begin with, and then take another reevaluation of the piece, getting rid of as many of the major inclusions as we possibly can, and leaving us with as gemmy a piece of material to work with.
Hopefully we'll make a treasure that somebody can pass on from generation to generation. This is a rare privilege to be able to carve one this size.